Hello, and welcome to this week's edition of Tax in 10 with me, Rachel.desouza, and Andrew.Robins. We are both tax partners in RSM's London office and have a wealth of experience in dealing with a wide range of private client matters. Your feedback is valuable to us, so do keep it coming, especially if you have any thoughts on topics you would like us to cover. You can contact us by email, and our email addresses are at the bottom of your screen. Today, I thought it would be interesting to talk about HMRC inquiries, and specifically about inquiries where, at the end of the day, the taxpayer has actually done nothing wrong.
Okay.
And the reason I bring this up is because there has been some recent news reports that HMRC has closed 93,000 cases in 21-22 without making any adjustments to the tax being charged. And I thought, that sounds like a huge number of cases and, a lot of wasted effort from HMRC. But then as I was thinking it through, I thought, well, perhaps that's not a fair reflection of what's really going on. So I thought we could explore that and also think about what it feels like to be out at the sharp end.
Yeah, that's an interesting one, actually. I think we've both seen examples of really big HMRC inquiries that end up coming to nothing. Well, I've got one in mind, especially that it took the best part of 3 years to close, and it cost the client a six-figure sum in terms of fees in order to persuade HMRC that what we've been telling them all along was correct. And that one was particularly frustrating because the inspector, if they'd just been less stubborn and more willing to listen to us, we could have just killed the whole thing off in 6 months.
I think the main case that comes to my mind was a bit different to that one, because in my case, HMRC was fully justified in delving deeply into what was an incredibly complicated transaction and situation. And actually, there was the potential of tens of millions of pounds of tax at stake. Now, in that case, again, it took well over 2 years, for the inquiry to sort of go backwards, forwards, and then reach its conclusion. But again, we did so without any adjustment to our client's tax return, and no additional tax was found to be due.
Now, I know that both of these cases are a bit unusual because of the amount of tax at stake, but I do think they're actually quite representative in lots of other ways. So the first thing is that regardless of whether HMRC were justified in doing the deep dive like they were in your case, or less so in mine, both of those examples show them taking far too long to get to a resolution. It's not helped by the number of times we see HMRC staff changing partway through an inquiry, which means that you then have to start all over again and getting an inspector to understand what's really going on. And I think another one that's quite universal is how quickly professional fees mount up. It takes a lot of time and it can get really expensive to deal with HMRC. And also just how stressful the whole situation is for the taxpayer. Now, in my case, HMRC were potentially demanding tax and penalties pretty much equal to the whole of the sales proceeds of his business. And despite me telling him repeatedly that you've done nothing wrong, the client convinced himself that he was going to have to sell his house to pay the tax. And he was terrified that he was going to end up in court.
Yeah, and I think you raise a really good point there. It really isn't just the financial cost or the financial implications that causes worry to the clients. Let's face it, no one likes to be investigated by HMRC, and clients do often actually comment that they find it quite stressful. I know of another client who made the decision to keep several £1 million of funds in cash, simply to ensure that should HMRC win the particular argument, he would immediately have the liquidity available to pay the tax. The downside to him, of course, was that actually it meant he put on hold his plans to actually spend that money and enjoy the wealth he had created until the inquiry was closed.
I think it's a good point. I can definitely think of cases where clients have effectively put their whole life on hold because they're afraid of what might happen with an inquiry. And, it can lead to things like missing out on property purchases, or even in one case that I can think of, changing plans about the country you're going to retire in. So basically, having HMRC look into your affairs is really miserable.
Okay, so we understand that it's unpleasant and really unpleasant to be in an inquiry situation. So I guess the obvious question is, can you do anything to make it less likely?
Well, one thing you can do is ensure that your tax return is completed accurately and as clearly as possible. I know it sounds sort of obvious, but actually it can make a difference. If you've got something complicated or unusual on your tax return, it is a really good idea to include an explanation. I mean, it's kind of common sense. If HMRC don't understand what they're seeing, it's not going to be a surprise if they then ask questions. And of course, if they're going to ask about one thing, they might as well throw the kitchen sink at you and ask about everything. So I know there's a natural instinct not to want to tell HMRC anything more than the absolute bare minimum. And I think in a lot of situations that's sensible. But we need to be a bit more, sophisticated about it than that, because often presenting the facts clearly from the beginning can save a lot of pain later.
That's right. And the trouble is, whatever you do, you can't eliminate the risk of HMRC deciding to inquire into your tax affairs. And I think there still are a small number of purely random inquiries that are opened every year. But I still think you're much more likely to be chosen if HMRC have information that doesn't seem to match your tax return disclosures, or if you have a transaction with subjective elements, like, for example, the base cost attributable to a sale of a foreign holiday home. And sometimes, even if you put the best possible explanations of what has gone on when submitting your return, you're going to get looked into regardless.
Yeah.
And of course, HMRC also run, so-called campaigns where they target certain sectors, certain types of taxpayer. For example, we know dentists have been targeted, and currently, from experience that I'm seeing, deemed domiciled individuals are getting a lot of attention as well.
Actually, that leads really neatly onto an opportunity for me to do a bit of a plug. We don't usually do the hard sell on tax intent, but this is my chance to make like a used car salesman for you. So you may not, and I think it's actually you're right. It often you can't prevent the risk of HMRC inquiring, but you can at least protect your downside in terms of the professional fees. For RSM, we do this through our ETCS offering. And this is an add-on to our tax return preparation work, where you pay a fixed annual fee that covers all of our costs for dealing with HMRC inquiries, other than in extreme cases like where you're being accused of fraud. Now, obviously, I would say this, but my experience is that clients do benefit hugely from buying ETCS, partly because it gives them certainty, but also because it means the whole management of the inquiry is dealt with by specialists at no extra cost.
But I have to say, Andrew, it's not like you to be any good at selling anything. So maybe I need to save this recording for posterity. Anyway, I think whatever approach you take, it's only going to it's only going to be more important to be prepared for dealing with HMRC inquiries in the future. We know that international information exchange agreements are now providing HMRC with high amounts of information, and there are now very few countries that do not cooperate on an international basis. So revenue computers are able to identify anomalies and omissions automatically. And it really won't be long before, AI comes to HMRC in a big way, and inquiries will be able to be issued, or inquiry notices will be issued without having to be seen by a human being at all.
Yeah. Just to wrap up, I would say dealing with HMRC is almost always frustrating and stressful for taxpayers. And I don't think that's ever going to change. To be fair to them, the statistics we talked about at the beginning show that the revenue are willing to listen to reason and do close a substantial number of inquiries without demanding tax when you can show that none is due. But we just need to get used to the idea that HMRC challenges are a fact of life, and try not to be too shocked when you get one.
Fine. Now, this week, I have a recommendation for you. I think a few episodes ago, or probably several episodes ago, I probably recommended some books by Lucinda Riley. And this was a series of books called Seven Sisters. So there are 7 books in the series, and each book focused on one sister. So far, so good. Now, very unfortunately, Lucinda Riley died in, I think it was 2021. But before, she had written the 8th book, which was the wrap up to the whole series and broadly brought all the threads together as to how these sisters came to be sisters, because they were all adopted and so on. Now, her son happens to be a writer as well. So he has, I think they officially co-authored the 8th book, which is called Atlas, the story of Pa Salt, and Pa Salt being the father to these the seven girls. So it's been a long time. I've been waiting for it for a long time. I've read it now. I really enjoyed it. It really does draw together all the threads that have been running through the previous 7 books. So it's really wonderful. Maybe for me, in some cases, a little bit far-fetched, but so what? I don't care. It's a great story. So that's Atlas, the story of Pa Salt by Lucinda Riley.
Brilliant.
And with that, it's down to us to say thank you for listening, and we'll see you again next time.
Bye.